Good morning and good evening, good afternoon. Thank you so much for being with us today. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Honor and I'm from Honor Way Marketing, and I'm here today with Calvin Cottar from Cottars in Kenya. I, at Honor Way, work with a lovely group of people all around Africa, and I'm really delighted with the response we've had to the webinars. I am going to start the presentation and hand you over to Calvin. So I'm going to screen share. And Calvin, welcome. Thank you for being here today, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Anna. I really appreciate your intro, and to all the participants from around the world, thank you for taking time to see this at whatever time it is in your place. Yeah, I mean, this is a tough time we have at the moment, and everyone is trying to push their best side out to everyone. Cottars is no difference, but our ambition is to show the other side of what we do. So move on the slide. So we're actually, as far as we know, one of the oldest safari companies in Africa, if not the oldest. Our transition, first of all, is through the hunting world. In the early, 4 generations ago, was definitely in the hunting world. That is why we can say that the experience of safari has been through our history. And so you can see the transition from primarily hunting into photographic and into what we call sustainable conservation through and easements. So the thing about when you look at that hunting and photographic words there are different ways of capturing the abstract value of wildlife. Those are just 2 ways: hunting, photographic. There's also carbon offsets. There's also philanthropy. There's many other mechanisms that value wildlife. But we're going to come to this later in the discussion, how the abstract value can work better for conservation, primarily tourism in our case. So move on to the next. So, well, first of all, where are we now? We're in Kenya. We operate 3 facilities and 1 DMC based in Nairobi. The facilities are in the Mara, just southeast of the Masai Mara National Reserve. And when you look at this picture, this is a familiar picture for anyone who sold Kenya, I'm sure. And when you look at this picture, you'll understand that Cottars being so far in the southeast, we're about as far as possible you can get away from the over-tourism that, unfortunately, Mara is known for. That is mostly along the river in the center. And again, we'll also talk about tourism inside the reserve as opposed to outside shortly. So, next slide. So next slide. There seems to have been a flip over the, go back one more. Another one. Back. I think it's this one. So we operate Cottar 1920s camp in that location called Olderekesi. So Cottar's 1920s camp, and this is a 1920s style camp. I don't know if there's a lag in the slides. Yeah, correct, yes. So we have 3 properties that we operate on Olderekesi Group Ranch, just outside the Mara Game Reserve. And the 1920s camp is very is high-end, very Edwardian, very luxurious, and it's the original white camp, selling sort of out of Africa experience. We started in the early 2000s. Then we also have the villa. The villa is the only luxury villa that I know of in the Mara ecosystem, that I can say really pushes the boundaries of luxury out in the Mara. And keep in mind that Cottar's has its own private airstrip, its own private area. It's called a conservancy, but even inside the game reserve, own private area in the reserve, simply because we, with other partners, camping partners, we secure the area from having lodges in there by leasing the sites that would be otherwise lodges that would compete with wilderness. So just keep in mind that we understand that what our clients want is wilderness with wildlife in it, and we work very hard to keep that wilderness. So it's the Mara that, what you're going to see when you come to Cottar's is the Mara that I remember as a child in the back of my father's game drive vehicle. No cars, no other tourists. Okay, moving right along. So, big delay in the slider. So in this process of being tourism, in the tourism industry, we realized that we had to define ourselves very differently, because there's a lot of greenwashing going on, and we really wanted to show that and to actually walk the walk, not just talk the walk. And so we did this by researching where and what accreditation processes we could join or be part of or even start. That would make a difference. And the long run fitted the bill nicely. And in fact, we were a founder member of the long run, one of the 12, 11 GERs, Global Ecosphere Retreats, around the world. Now, between the members of the long run, we control or secure 25 million acres of land for biodiversity. That was the first thing. It's all about space and biodiversity. And that we also follow these 4 C's, the conservation, community, culture, and commerce C's. And we have to improve on those 4 C's every year. So that's our commitment to the process. Every year we have to define what we're going to improve, how we're going to improve, and there's deadlines. And it's a tough organization to remain a member of, because you've got to keep improving to be a member. So this is a very important process that I would recommend is supported strongly by the industry. So please give that a look. Now, in doing this, we realized over my many years of different access to, or processes in my life, I was in the hunting, I was in the tourism, I was in the wildlife management, I was in government under Richard Leakey. We were developing the forums there for community wildlife management, and came to the conclusion that we needed to have a vehicle, non-government, non-profit organization that would actually apply our principles on the ground. So we developed the Cottar's Wildlife Conservation Trust. If you go to the next slide, please. So the Cottar's Wildlife Conservation Trust is basically, 1920s and all the tourism facilities pay into Cottar's Wildlife Trust a conservation fee. The conservation fee is then translated into a land lease and easement payment to the Maasai. And the whole idea is to empower the communities to control and decide, if they want wildlife on their land, because this is the tragedy and the problem, is that do Maasai and do Kenyan landowners want wildlife on the land? That's the first question to answer. And if they don't want wildlife on the land, then they have no choice but to remove it and to put other ways of earning a living. It might be crops, it might be cattle, but certainly probably won't include wildlife if it's not funded. So this is our vehicle to do all of this work. We also do a lot of above the line things. We bring specialists to build bridges and to build schools, medical clinics. We fund bursaries and feeding programs. At the moment, it's for 800 kids in local schools. So there's a lot of above the line stuff beyond the leasing that we do. And we have an expansion plan, and I'll come into that in a minute. Go for it. So, but one has to understand this direction from understanding the problems that we're facing. And this map just simply shows that in Kenya, about 8% of the land area of Kenya is under national parks and reserves and forest reserves. And on the right, you can see the yellow shading is where human wildlife conflict is prevalent. Okay, that was up to between 2008 and 2010. And the issue really is, what this map shows is this is where wildlife really exists in Kenya. And it's where the conflict is with landowners who are changing the land use to other resources, crops, cattle, well, monocultures of all kinds. And so it's a simple fact that 70% of all wildlife lives outside of national parks and reserves. And it's also another fact that the sort of colonial era wildlife laws, which have been inherited by our independent governments, they actually, it's called state ownership of wildlife. They disenfranchise landowners from having access to the abstract value that wildlife is able to earn. So you have this tragedy where there's billions of dollars being generated by wildlife, but the people who actually live with the cost of wildlife, as in elephants, lions eat their cows, and people are killed and injured, literally hundreds, if not thousands of injuries, but certainly hundreds of deaths in a year, all living in that yellow area, they get very little from this incredible capture of value from wildlife. This value is mostly captured by the national parks and reserves and by the state, and of course by us, the selling chain, the people doing operations in tourism and making a living. And us in our history, we understand, we have been part of that. There's no law being broken, but it's just a fact. It's out of a $2 billion industry, I think 0.2% gets to landowners of wildlife in any shape or form. So this is actually the tragedy. So we're aiming to change this narrative. But I'll elaborate a little bit on the next slide, what it looks like in our area. So this is a picture of land use change in the Mara ecosystem. And all the purple, you can see that purple is where land has actually already been sacrificed to agriculture. That is fragmented, fenced agriculture or farming or cattle ranching, where in fact no wildlife can possibly have a future because that land is being subjected into what is beneficial to the local people. And you can see the scale of it. If it's increasing at 8% per year, then what will be left? And this area, what you see in this picture, is the area where 25% of Kenya's wildlife currently lives. This is the most important wildlife area of Kenya. It's the ecosystem of the Greater Mara, of the Masai Mara. Next slide, please. Back one. Okay, so this is the problem we have, is this sort of fence line. Okay, so I think go to the fence line one. Yeah, so this is the issue. You know, when people get title deed to their land, and in Kenya we followed British law, which is freehold land rights. The community land is inevitably, and it's the government policy to subdivide the land and give it to individual owners. And the first thing they do is to put a fence up with cedar poles, usually straight from the forests of the Mao or the Namine and Kyo. And these are old growth trees. It takes 400 years to be mature, but they're resistant to termites. So they put these fences up, and basically it's not to stop as such, it's more to stop their neighbors' cows from coming on their land. So it's all about protecting their land rights. And so the Conservancy movement, and what I'm going to be suggesting in this talk later, is once you value the land, once they value the land for wildlife and open access, there's no need to cut the trees down to make the fence lines. If every plot in Mara was to be fenced like this, there would literally be no trees standing in the whole of, certainly south of Kenya, part of Kenya. It would take thousands of kilometers of fence lines to protect everyone's land. So the Conservancy is not just about wildlife in the local area. It's about the forest, 100 miles away, where the trees are being cut down for, for peanuts. There's 200 bob a post or something. It's to save the watershed. It's much more than just wildlife. Next slide, please. And who can blame the local community if wildlife, if the system doesn't give the people an income that can overcome or pull them out of poverty, then what choice do they have? So you can't blame the poor communities around the Mara. Maybe the responsibility should be placed elsewhere. And I think government regulation has a large part to play in this, incentivizing, like first of all, doing land use planning and incentivizing the right land uses. Is wildlife a land use, really? Is it a legitimate land use? That's the question. Or should they be sent back to the national parks, as often poor people will say, take your animals back to the national parks because it's state-owned? Well, our model is showing that there is a proxy value to wildlife, and it is through land and leasing. But the biggest challenge we have had has been finding that money to lease it at a fair value that will actually compete with the other land uses, whether it's wheat, cattle, maize, corn. So this is the big challenge, is how do we raise the funds for this? And tourism has a large part to play in this. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of, for example, the elephant coast in that same area where the where the purple, where the purple was showing where the land use is changing to agriculture, and it overlays exactly where these poor elephants are trying to go from A to B. These are all critical corridors, migration routes, and so if all of that land is converted to agriculture, more elephants anymore. So what happens? It's the big human wildlife conflict, deaths of people, and ultimately death of lots of elephants. So where did the elephants go when there's no space? Will they all squash into the Masai Mara and reserve? No, I don't think so. The reason why the elephants are going out here, all this area, is because the Masai Mara National Reserve itself is not a big enough area for the elephants all year round. Elephants are browsers. The Mara is mostly grass. Elephants do eat grass sometimes of the year, but they need to eat their proper food, which is leaves from trees and bushes. So, so this is why they go out on these long excursions. And you'll see number 14 is Alderakesi, and you can see that red line going to the Naimina Enkyo forest. This is one of the most amazing old forests in the country. The elephants, about 4,000 elephants go between the Mara and the Naimina Enkyo forest every year. And this is our mission, particularly with Cottar, is to try to secure that land between the Mara and Naimina Enkyo through leasing and easements. Next slide, please. There's quite a lag in these slides. I'm sorry. And there's a classic example of some nice smelly ellies enjoying. Oh, that's outside of the game reserve. That's Conservancy. So thank God the conservancies are making space for the elephants where they would otherwise be persecuted and fighting poor people who are trying to grow food. Move on the next slide, please. So we've been working with different partners. This one in particular was with IUC and Sustainable Livelihood Institute. It's a wonderful broad range of experts. But we at Cottars were on the sort of this planning behind this, and it basically shows what anyone wanting to do conservancy or wildlife as a land use, what anywhere in Africa would have to do this sort of plan. It's called a theory of change, and the theory of change is a negotiation process. It's a structured negotiating process to help the communities who have the land and the wildlife on their land to understand basically what is the alternative to just turning it all into fragmented farming. So you have to have these 4 pathways done at the same time concurrently. So number 1 pathway is disincentivizing illegal wildlife use, such as poaching. And this is really the range of forces, all of the things you read about, the dogs, the trackers, the strong laws, and the support of the courts, etc. That's very important. But it should never be harder or more powerful than pathway B, which is incentivizing wildlife as a land use. So it's super important to have the incentive stronger than the disincentive. So you actually can drive the energy and the forces in the area more towards, doing the right thing rather than penalizing each other. Okay, number C pathway is reducing human-wildlife conflict and interface. And of course, you need a defined area for this. You've got to work in an area. And for us, it's Olderkesi. So we had to bring in 6,000 people through their leadership structure and come to conclusions on this. So reducing human and wildlife conflict and interface is all about land use planning. You start from the beginning. What is your dreams? What is your aspirations? And we have these aspirations for this area. And you build in your plan to theirs, but you prioritize their plan. By the way, it's their land, it's their choice, always, even if the law says, or if someone says it shouldn't be allowed, they're there 24/7 and will apply what they want on their land. It's always been the way of mankind. So that's about land use planning. And I'll show you on the next slide what that looks like. But first we'll go into the supporting the non-wildlife related. Go back to the other one, sorry. Yeah. So we're supporting, pathway D is supporting the non-wildlife related livelihoods. So what do people do when all that land is now available and made free of people, having to grow food? Remember, they're getting value for that land. They're getting better value than they can get if they grow food. So it's not a negative force to push them out. It's their choice to move to the centers, to the villages. And in the centers, we aim to give, what we are proposing, a solution, is to give people a choice to join the modern multiplier economy. And what does this mean? This means basically that they have vocational training in all of the things they currently don't do. If young people are only learning how to herd goats, but they only have 15 acres to herd three cows and 10 goats, there's hardly a future. There's hardly a life for the young people of this area. But if they do learn to be mechanics and learn wiring, electronics, and they can get into rotoscoping, these sort of different and interesting things, then you do a vocational training program. You need to do a funding of startups, maybe microfinance. We also have a microfinance program, or Olderkesi is one of the examples of this drive. But they also need infrastructure, internet, communications, all of the things that, you and I all have. We live in the multiplier modern economy. We need the Maasai and the poorest people on the planet in Africa to come out of subsistence cropping and living hand to mouth day to day at the whims of climate change and poor rainfall and locusts. We need them to come into our world, because the fact is that in the developed world, 0.5% at the most of populations grow the food for the entire population. It's properly structured, done in the right places, etc. In Africa, in Kenya for sure, it's 40% of the population currently has to live off what they grow, and there's no money to go and buy food at the supermarket, which was grown elsewhere. But with the easements and leases, that is going to be possible to have less stress on what you eat today. And then to get wealthy and climb up the hierarchy of needs, that's joining the multiplier economy. Next slide, please. So this is what the Olderkesi plan looks like. Remember, it was done by over a long period of time, years of negotiation, thousands of people involved, hundreds of meetings, and to the conclusion that yes, those are the pink areas. Those areas are the right places for the community centers. This is where we invest all the schools, all the energy in schools, or any kind of water projects will focus there. Even to the point that where land is subdivided, every single member has a plot in and around one of those centers. So they build their house there rather than everywhere else. Because, if you build your house on your plot, which might be 4 kilometers away in the bush in the middle of an elephant corridor, that's going to cause a whole lot of hassle for the elephants and for you in the end. So centralize people, keeping in mind that pillar C, which is about the land use planning, it defines where people will be, where agriculture will be, where wildlife will be. And the idea is to get away from soft edge, blurry lines, like bee fences and lion lights and those sort of things, and more hard edge solutions in the future, so that people don't have to fear going to school or walking back home at night from the bar, which is currently the case. So we're going generally soft edge to hard edge solutions. You can see our proposed phase of growth of the conservancies, phase 1, phase 2, 3, and 4. And this is part of that corridor I was talking about. And those red lines in the map, it shows you where the elephants, currently we know they concentrate going along those river courses and where we have to secure. Next slide, please. So this is all part of a bigger plan. I'm very honored to be on the board of Masai Mara Wildlife Conservancies Association, which represents 15 conservancies, and all in the brown area. You can see just there to the right of and above the Mara Reserve. But the yellow area is the area we are trying to secure in the future. And this is the greater Mara ecosystem that I was talking about, where 25% of Kenya's total wildlife populations live, where agriculture is currently growing at a rate of 8% per year. This Mara Conservancies movement, of which we are just one little one, hopefully growing out to be a lot bigger in the future, is the only way that this population of wildlife around the Mara, and therefore in the Mara, can survive. And because the wildlife in the Mara Reserve is the same wildlife that's outside. And if it goes outside and gets poisoned or killed, it'll never come back in. So just be aware that the Mara will probably not be a viable, even though it's connected to the Serengeti, the famous Mara and its migration will be less and less viable the more land out here is not secured. So this is part of the plan. We feel that the leasing of land, or should I say the payment of biodiversity easements, is the only way you can justify wildlife going into the future. And it's also the only way that, we can outcompete things like hunting and all those other, I would say even ivory trade. Why not fight the ivory trade by valuing wildlife through proxy of land, by leasing it, by making thousands, hundreds of thousands of people benefit from having elephants on their land rather than wanting it off their land. So, poaching, bushmeat poaching, ivory trade, all of these are often a byproduct of land use change. You have to understand that, in the current laws, it often doesn't make sense to keep wildlife alive, so people will monetize it or eat it as they remove it. And that makes the land or in a national park. So I'm just saying that's the big picture. And anyway, please check out the Masai Mara Wildlife Conservancies Association website, maraconservancies.org, and you'll be surprised by the work that's gone into this model. We're very proud to be there. So next slide, please. Oh, okay. So Cottar has had its own little appeal going out to keep us going when tourism crashed with COVID. Of course, just under 70% of our funding for the Conservancies because Wildlife Trust was, in fact, we can move off the slides now, I'll continue to talk a few ideas. And a lot of the pressures have been to bring funding from other sources in to help us, and we've been very, very thankful to AWF for helping us in this. But everyone is still short. Even the Masa Marawala Conservancy has appeals out. We have appeals. Every conservancy in Africa has an appeal. This just shows that there is a big problem in the way tourism is set up. And I'm just going to counsel my thoughts on how to go forward. I believe that the selling chain, the beneficiaries of tourism need to really look hard at how we can structure a mechanism so that in the good years, a percentage of profit or an amount per client towards central fund of some kind that can keep countries in crisis, conservancies or conservation work in crisis, in countries in crisis funded. Because if we don't, we have total collapse, and there's no chance that poor rural people will give us another chance again. If we've already got conservation going on there and you let them collapse, there's no way you're going to go back. They will never trust it again. And why should they? So it's imperative that we keep conservation going. And I would counsel strongly that to the selling chain that we need to make tourism, in a way, long haul travel to Africa, safaris particularly, the best way that you can save the planet, the best way to sequester carbon, the best way to keep biodiversity. But you've got to prove it. You can't sell it if you can't prove it. So maybe we change the definition of sustainable travel to how much land per room is secured by property. Literally, that narrow it down to a very definite thing. And this can also work with marine areas. How many square kilometers per room, or whatever the definition of area is in the oceans, that is secured by a hotel or by a cruise line company, so that the people doing them have to do the damage because they're compensated properly from our incredibly rich and growing industry. So I'll leave it there for now, and I'm very happy to answer questions. And thank you for listening. I'm ready for the hard ones. Mm-hmm. I'll keep on talking if people are still listening. Yeah, yeah, brilliant question. And so this is a question that can be basically answered by your agent. The first thing is to define whether a lodge is inside a national park or reserve. That's the first thing to ask. Now, we all know tourism goes into parks and reserves. We go into park and reserve. Our lodge is outside, but we go in and we pay our dues, and that is the correct thing to do. But remember that the land inside is already secure. If there was no tourism in any national park or reserve, it would still be there. Now, it may not be managed well, or it may have challenges, may have funding challenges, but the government is obligated to funding the management, the OPEX of those parks and reserves. Make no mistake, it's not related to tourism because it gets its funding from the treasury and the tax base. Now, companies anywhere, inside or outside, are taxed. That is what should be funding parks and reserves. And if there isn't enough tax base to fund parks and reserves, then they have the government-to-government aid, like USAID, and that is what that should be for, because that aid is not available to lease land outside. It is not even an option. It's a sovereign issue. You cannot, government, lease land in Africa. It's a sovereign issue. So by having tourism inside, unless those lodges are securing land outside, they're actually stopping the possibility of that tourism dollar working for the greater conservation or conservation of the greater area. So that's number one. Number two is just ask the lodges that you're staying in, how much do you secure? Literally, how much do you secure? What land area do you secure? So I make no distinction between a big rancher with 100,000 acres with a lodge on it. If that is securing that, lodge is securing that land, yes. I do not make a distinction between them and a community with 6,000 members. If they are securing the land because of your work, that is valid. I think so. Really, the question is just ask the operators and the agents as well. What do you do? You know, is it just that you send me to the right lodges, but what do you do? You're in the capturing of the abstract value of tourism. So these are the hard questions, and the industry has to adjust to the consumer asking these questions. Because, by the way, when people are doing long-haul flights in the future, they'll have to justify it to their neighbors and to their peer group, because a lot of flight shaming, a lot of why are you traveling unnecessarily? It's all I'm reading about on the internet. And so we have to prove that this travel business is the best thing to do for the planet, not a negative thing to do for the planet. So I have no structure in mind. I just think that we need to think out of the box and put these conglomerates together with airlines, with the DMCs, with the agents, and with the lodges to really make this work. That's my answer. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. This is a great question, and the answer is, the Maasai. I think it's what they think. If the Maasai are in the process of subdividing their land, the problem is that when their land is subdivided, they will rush to secure their land anyway. So we are in a race against the ambitions of the Maasai, who have every right to do what they want on their land. And how quickly our rollout plan is for 6 or 7 years for this, but I think it'll happen a lot quicker. And if we're not ready, it'll be harder to get their land once it's already subdivided. It's going to be harder if we're not ready for it. The answer is, I think COVID has definitely put a spanner in the works to the finance that is possible, but it's also it's had the upside of exposing the frailty of tourism as a source of revenue for this. Maybe we need to look at a restructured tourism industry. That's just what I'm talking about. But also how wildlife NGO philanthropy money is used. What is it used for? Maybe the carbon industry should step in. There's new mechanisms we should look at, joining forces, biodiversity value. There's so many plus, RED plus, I think. And these sort of mechanisms have to be simplified and combined. So maybe COVID I see a lot of movements into new ways of valuing biodiversity during this crisis. And maybe this is an opportunity rather than the negative it has to be. I think it's actually going to be an opportunity for the planet to reset in a way how people view profit in their big companies in the West or in the East. What is the actual resource that's making them the profit? Well, clearly, mostly it's not to do with where the air and water comes from and elephants in Africa, but maybe it should. Maybe companies should be looking at putting far more investment into the primary resources of our planet and building that into their business plans and having guaranteed money going from their huge profits towards Africa and the poorest people on the planet to climb out of poverty. I mean, where else do you get $1 doing 2 jobs, securing biodiversity and pulling people out of poverty? I seriously recommend not buying land, but leasing land at a fair value. That will change the world. Right? Thank you, Ken. That's a great question. I would say the first thing is we're all in. I know that even your business has collapsed. I mean, so right now, what we need to do is spend energy in refiguring the industry. And I would say, like for example, in South Africa, you have the imminent crisis of, for example, all those hundreds of thousands of ranches went towards wildlife because of hunting. When the hunting industry collapses, which is inevitable because the market countries don't want hunting, trophies being brought into the UK, Australia, whatever. That's all going to go. Hunting iconic African species, not going to happen in the next few years. So what do you do for your landowners who have invested huge amount of resources into turning the land back to wildlife? I mean, you've had a 40% increase in wildlife in the last 40 years. 40% because of that. Now that's going to collapse because of the success of activism against recreational killing, hunting. So what are you going to, how can you can help your landowners to keep their wildlife intact? So it's about education. It's about spreading out tourism from just the core areas. It's about getting those big conglomerates who are again making huge profits in the years to spread it out. I think the message is the most important thing here, and to frame the narrative around what is sustainable tourism. Securing land is number one. Helping landowners who have wildlife keep their wildlife. Otherwise, they have no choice but to remove it. They will remove the wildlife if it's not viable. So, in terms of concrete things, I strongly recommend you look at the Mara Conservancy's website and model, and of course, you can learn a lot there. And I will share some papers that will help you understand the roots of the problem even better. Joseph Agutu's papers on this is very important. But also there's other papers from Robin Reed from University of Colorado. Study what she has written about the transition of land from large landscapes to small landscapes and fence fragmented farming, and then back into large landscapes. It's happening all over the world in developed countries. But the Mara Conservancies is the best example in East Africa, I would say, of this process. So I've got no clear thing other than educate yourself and understand that there is a change coming, and we as the industry have to drive the consumer narrative. We don't want them to demand something that we're not already ready for. We need to actually drive the narrative. And so I'm saying we've got to think through this. Yeah. So thank you. The first thing is that I want to be in the camp a lot more. That's my home, my love, and my soul is there. So I would say I'm there probably 30% of the time, but I'm planning to be there more. But my guides are well aware of these principles, and we have the Conservancy camp and the Conservancy CWCT managers are available always. So your guests will always get this narrative to the degree that they're open to listening to it. My guides are very emotionally intelligent and will know not to. It's not all about, it's got to be their pleasure experience as well. And so the guides have the smarts to know the boundaries. But of course, I would love to be there. If you want me to be there specifically, you can send me an email, or my team an email, and ask if I'm there. And generally, I can, I'll try to gear my time around hosting your guests.
Thank you. Do you think that there is too much emphasis on in the fundraising and charity sector on specific species conservation rather than total habitat conservation and the educating and supporting of local communities?
Yes. So thank you, whoever gave that question.
That was from Tom in the UK.
Great, great question, Tom. So the answer is 100% yes. The problem is everyone's willing to give to a baby elephant or a noosed lion, you know, and especially if it's named. But that is not the problem. The problem is where the hell are you going to put these animals when there's that kind of land use change? The other problem is that the wildlife NGOs are driven by another force, which is the donor conditions. So the donor will want to put money into an entity like any NGO, and they'll say, well, our funding is limited to 5 years or whatever it is, a 5-year cycle. By the end of that 5 years, we want our money to have made something on the ground self-sufficient so that, oh, everything is going well. So we've done something, walked away, and we've left something that they continue doing. But remember, the resource base is not owned by the community. It is not theirs to use. They are not allowed to use it. And the tourism industry, as I've been saying here, has been captured by the best people at doing that. For years, it's basically a system that is rigged against the poor communities trying to do something. And again, it's another value system. Value of wildlife is an abstract concept. It's like a Rembrandt painting. If you bring a Rembrandt painting to a Maasai village, it's a roof in the rain, that is all. But that same painting is $100 million in New York. And wildlife is the same. It's got value to someone outside, you, me, and I walk by. But to Maasai, unless the abstract value is captured and is actually better than doing cows and maize, then it's a cost. It's a cost. It kills people. It eats grass. It brings diseases. It breaks infrastructure. It kills your child. So, you know, I'm just saying the narrative is wrong. The NGOs need to step up and say, you know, we don't want your money unless it is unconditional for what we need. What has to be sustainable is not what people on the land do. It's the funding that has to be sustainable. If you make a condition to secure land for 20 years, you better make sure that the money's there, because you're asking people to sacrifice other opportunities. So you hear what I'm saying? And so the answer is that whole world has to change, in my view. And I believe that in Kenya, if 75% of all donor funding, which is in the hundreds of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, if just 75% of that just went to leasing land the way we're doing in the Mara, it would change the game. And the same as, you know, it would probably add, if you look at 100 million, right now in the Mara Conservancies, there's just under 2,000 square kilometers secured by about, what, $12 million? What can you know, $75 million do of all the funds that are raised by well-meaning, beautiful people who just want to help elephants? If it just goes to land, and I'm not talking about buying land, I'm talking about leasing, just lease land. Because when you buy land for wildlife, you're buying future problems. You're buying future problems because wildlife can be politicized against you, because now you're looking after your land, you bought it, but as people get poorer outside, they'll come in, well, politicians can say, hey, that grass there, you know, if you just go in there with your cows or you kill the elephants, I'll protect you, and just when it's time to vote, you vote for me. I mean, how long is protected areas going to last with that, or how long is wildlife going to last with that? So I'm just saying simply, we've got to have a new narrative around the NGO world in wildlife.
So that kind of, in a way, leads to this next question, which is how can you make that acquisition of land tangible for clients? I.e., can you show clients the land that has been acquired last year, so that visitors who are visiting now can kind of see
Sure.
the way that Bush Villa is a perfect example, and the view in front of the Bush Villa. Anyway, I'll just finish that question, which is have a more direct link to their contributions, that when they return, which obviously would be great because they're buying into that to come and visit, they can see their contribution. That's from Thomas Belgium.
Brilliant question. And I would say, yes, absolutely. I think in the Mara Conservancies, if you were to look at an Aldericesi, we'd be able to show you, you know, exactly what we're doing. The challenge is that the biggest wildlife problems in Kenya are so far away from tourism, and they're in places you'd never go for tourism. There's just wildlife conflicting. So to secure the corridors, yes, I mean, we can arrange a helicopter ride or a car ride or a plane ride to those places. If you look at the scale of the problem, just to secure, I mean, I work with a wonderful man called Mike Norton Griffiths. He gave me the figures. And he basically, it'll take, to secure Kenya's current wildlife, we would need to secure about 150,000 square kilometers in Kenya in this model, which would cost just under $600 million. It's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
But in the scheme of, it is not a lot of money, because that's sort of 5 to 7 million Kenyans pulled out of poverty. It would resolve so many other ills that every year we have 1 million people in poverty right now. Every year we have crisis, people dying of starvation. That is exactly where we're talking about helping through leases and easements. So think of that. Where would if a client wanted to fund this sort of mechanism, use an organization that is already doing the leasing. Don't be very careful who you choose. Masai Mara Wildlife Conservancy Association is a great place to start. Of course, Alder Kessi has his growth plans up to Naimina and Kyo. But there are others, wonderful organizations. Kenya Wildlife Conservancies Association will have a lot of information on this. And also look at other places, Botswana, the concessions, the concessions that were given up by the hunting, when hunting was closed and have collapsed, where there's all those problems now with elephants. Those are the concessions in Botswana to take up and secure. Yes, so there's a huge issue around redirecting a lot of money to the right things. We can certainly show you where it's worked.
Brilliant. Thank you, Calvin. Then there's two questions actually, which is also interesting. One is, sorry, my screen lagged. Which tourism operators they allow to operate in the conservancies? Do the conservancies have management plans, and wouldn't it make sense that one of the requirements is that a percentage of the profit goes to the conservancy and into the community? Also, wouldn't it make sense that the percentage should exceed the amount that the communities would make from agriculture on this land? And that's from Kerry in South Africa.
Oh, it's got to be, I'll just start with the last question. So yes, it's got to meet or exceed what agriculture can do, or the next best land use option. But remember, you've got the input cost. So what wildlife management has is some input costs, but it's not probably as much as agriculture, because agriculture, you've got to do all the work to remove the wild vegetation, to put the fence up and all that. So wildlife can have a lower input costs in management, especially if one uses collective liability and benefit mechanisms, which basically engineers it so that the village level control mechanisms can work for wildlife. So you can, theory is that you can reduce the enforcement and ranges and punishment and all of the hard disincentivizing things with a positive incentivizing method. So everyone gets more if an individual doesn't poach or do something wrong. So the answer to Kerry is absolutely, if you cannot actually bring the payments up to that level that actually competes, then it's a false conservancy. You cannot give $5 and say, because people will say, okay, you only give me $5? Yes, sure, it's $5 I wasn't going to get, so we'll say yes, but your plans will not work because they'll use your same dollar to do the thing that you don't want them to do in the end. It's got to be real. It's got to be real. And so the value of biodiversity is simply this. It's not the value of hunting, it's not the value of ivory. What the value of biodiversity is, and elephants and lions, is the opportunity cost of not doing another land use on a defined area. That's it. So Kerry's right. It is look at what is the competing land use. It is always complicated by proximity value to cities, proximity values to parks, Like, for example, around the Mara, the land value right near the reserve is higher because it's closer. Someone's willing to come and pay an abstract value or speculative value than the land 40 k's away. Got to take that into account too. If you don't, you're barking up the wrong tree. It's able to compete if it's not real to the people around, because they decide the fate of that land. Anyway, that's what land use. This is where government regulations can come in and help steer or stop the sort of developments, like I would say around Nairobi Park. There's all this capitation around Nairobi Park that basically, squash in through people having private houses right near the Mara. Well, that kills the whole concept of wilderness. And what are people willing to pay for coming to the Mara if there's a house at every corner, and or some kind of structure every 100 meters? I mean, government should regulate these things, and land use planning, spatial land use planning, should be adhered to. So I think it's a balance between the money that can be paid, the reasonable money that can be paid, and government regulations. And there's a fine balance that has been struck in other parts of the world very successfully, in the States and the UK and Australia and other parts of the world. It's been done, so it's possible. Yeah. Mm. Mm. I think that's a great question. We've approached a few. The bottom line is we don't necessarily need them to visit the conservancy, because we're trying to control access. We would like expansion is what we need. So basically, if they are in the reserve or on the edges, whatever, and they're too close to each other, they can't secure just around them, they can help the Mara Conservancies or Masa Mara Wildlife Conservancy Association to expand that conservancy area at the back where there is no tourism. So there's no conflict of interest, no contradiction, as long as that lodge inside the reserve can say, we are securing 300 acres per room. It's not here because we're in the game, but it is out there and we can take it. But the Mara Conservancies Association would accredit them with that. It's going to be on the website. It's going to be something you can pin down. It is real. It's authentic. So I think, first of all, personally, I think there shouldn't be lodges inside the game reserves at all. It's not what. It's not. It seems contradictory to what government policy has been. It seems to be everyone is just trying to get tourism squashed into the middle there. That's been the drive, and I think it's a mistake. I think honestly, the government would achieve a lot more development in the area by having the lodges outside. And we can all visit, daily visits and camping visits, sure, but the infrastructure inside, they should be outside. Now, whether the government runs their own lodges inside, that's government land. That is another issue. But the private sector going in there and not being government hotels, I think they should be outside. So anyway, that's another issue. That is a big, it'll cause me some flack from my friends who I love very much and who I constantly try to convince to come out. But it is what it is. It's what I believe in, and I can prove it. Mm-hmm. So I've got the simplest answer ever. And okay, let's just define camps and lodges and hotels. How much land do they secure that would be otherwise under another kind of land management? That's all. There's nothing else. Don't talk about solar panels. Don't talk about any of that. That's a given. You've all got to do that. I mean, if you don't do that, you shouldn't even be in the business. But the definition that makes it special and really, truly going to change the planet is how much land is that lodge or hotel securing per room per year. And in terms of the selling chain, I just said earlier that we've got to get the selling chain more involved. And I'm not saying take out of the bottom line, but take out of the top above the line, profits in the good years, contribute to the bigger picture and support those lodges that are doing the right thing. Yeah. So the main positive is that in community conservation, you're actually pulling thousands of, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people out of poverty. In private conservation, usually what that means is that there's land that's being bought with one payment to someone, maybe last year, maybe 20 years ago, maybe 70 years ago. But that deal is gone. That money's gone, and all the local people around private conservation or conservancies are feeling is aggression because that's their former land that someone was hoodwinked into selling a long time ago. So then you get that political narrative. Look at it, look at it. I'm sorry, but unless we change this mindset around private conservancies and have it, if the private conservancies were to work hard to bring in the communities, you've got three layers of those private conservancies can change the narrative. Number one, you have to have protection by someone senior, so that's another senior guy not going to take over your land. But number two, bring in the local community around you into the benefits of it, so they actually have a stake in your even if it's tourism, whatever, that narrative. And number three is to go 100 kilometers away and help a community far away who would be coming to your land in times of stress. Help them do ecotourism there, share holistic grazing methods, all the technologies that maybe we can do in the new world better. Because you've got to understand, pastoralists understand holistic grazing on an ecosystem-wide basis. But when it comes down to smaller and smaller lands, it's much more difficult to apply, and the social control mechanisms don't necessarily work the same way. So it's very hard to stop tragedy of the commons in a smaller area until there's a fence up. So that rancher, the private conservancy, should be working far away in the future, the places where the future population will come onto you. In terms of the community conservancies, how else are we going to rationalize human development with wildlife conservation or biodiversity conservation and actually carbon sequestration? All the ills of our planet is in this very question. All of the megafauna, where it's being talked about it being killed off and poisoned and poached and everything, it's on these people's lands. If the narrative doesn't change, then goodbye to it all, including our planet. I'm thinking clearly. But really, this is the only thing we have to do. Convert the abstract value of wildlife that is mostly outside into real living wage down on the ground, so that the community, the member in the community, the individual family it's like a universal pay from the easements of their land to biodiversity. It's like a universal pay, the conservation easement. It's just that. And by the way, it can be structured so that if away their biodiversity, they're not paid that amount. So it's an incentive-driven scheme. And so the thinking behind this, I cannot tell you, it's not enough just to have a fenced area with lions in there and say, oh, this is a conservancy. This is no solution. This is actually probably a problem in the future with it being taken over by millions of people who say, this is our land. Unless you make that land outside where they are better and you bring them into your benefits, it's a certainty that's what will happen. So that's my opinion on that. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. Namaste. Take care.